Ever since I bought my 180, it has been leaking from every possible location that holds liquid in the car. And today, I think we're finally at the end of all the possible leaks. So yes, when I bought my 180, it was leaking from everywhere. We first replaced the radiator. It was broken, was leaking coolant. It had a cracked overflow, aka it was a Powerade bottle. We replaced that. The power steering hard lines, the high pressure lines was leaking, had to replace that. Oil leak from the valve cover gasket, replaced that. And now we're tackling the final leak, the...
Not yet. Oh, yes. There's one other one.
What?
Isn't your coilovers leaking?
Shock's blown. Is that a leak?
Blown. I don't know.
Okay, well...
Later date.
It's the last leak, in quotation marks, except for a blown shock. The car still drives fine. So today we will be replacing the rear main seal, which is the final leak on the 180. It's not a very expensive part, it only costs about $10, $15. The problem is getting to it. So what is required? You need to take your exhaust off, your tail shaft off, and your entire gearbox off. And if anyone's done it before, there's not a lot of room when it comes to taking the gearbox off. These engines and gearbox packages were definitely installed by just shoving them in together at the factory. So sit back, relax. We will be showing you exactly what we're doing. If you're wanting a more in-depth video on down to the nut and bolt and everything that we're going to be doing, we'll link up in the top corner there our video when we did it to Morgan's S15, which was also a 5-speed conversion, but the boxes are practically the same when it comes to bolt placements and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, click the link up there. If you're wanting to see us struggle over a day and a half or two, continue to watch this one. All right, so ever since buying my 180, it's had every leak you can imagine. We had a coolant leak, power steering leak, oil leak. I think, is that all the leaks you can have? I think so. Yeah, it's had a lot of leaks. AC, that's the only leak it hasn't had. Fingers crossed, touch wood. It's never had that leak and it won't. But we are finally fixing the last leak on my 180, and it's probably one of the most annoying leaks to fix on a car, and that is a rear main seal leak. So while we're in there, we're also going to be changing the starter motor and just refreshing up some of the bushings and bearings in the gearbox just to make sure it shifts into gears nicely. So come join us as we slog this out and hopefully come away with a 180 that does not leak, which is very rare. So we won't go too in depth in this. If you want to know how to remove your shifter and the whole shifter surround, go to our video where we replaced the shifter and shift boot. It's very simple. Just pull out this fascia plate, unscrew your shifter, and everything will come off. Alright, so we've jacked the 180 up. We need to get 2 more bolts on the top where the shifter is, just to take the shifter plate off. But before we start anything, we're going to just spray some penetrant oil into all of the bell housing bolts and some of the bolts underneath, just because this car, well, it's the underside of the car, it's going to get road, grime, dirt and crap underneath, so we don't want to be snapping any bolts. So we'll spray all these, and hopefully we don't have to fight a bolt today. Once we've done that, it just becomes start removing everything that is in the way. So yeah, enjoy this montage. As you can see right here, rear main seal leak. So that is the main thing of today, and then obviously starter motor and a few other things. So we'll do that. All right, so we have taken off the tail shaft out the back of the gearbox. We have also taken off from about the cap back of the exhaust. We didn't show that. It's just so we can get more access to the gearbox. We've taken up the shifter plate off the top of the gearbox. So all there is to do now is to drain the gearbox of its oil. We'll then go around the bell housing, take all the bolts out. We've got the clutch, what was it? Slave. A few bits and bobs, and then we can drop the gearbox out. For those of you who watch YouTube and then cut the gearboxes out, we have been fighting two bolts for, what, 3 hours? 4 hours now?
Yeah.
Oh. And that's the last one. Alright, so we fought with the gearbox for around about 4 hours just to get two bolts off. They were the ones right at the tippy top, which was quite annoying, but we finally got it off. We've got the old remain seal off. This is just hard as a rock. It's not sealing anymore, so that's why that's happened. You can see the entire bottom side, the back of the engine's coated in oil. So we've got our nice OEM remain sealed installed. Then we've got the pilot bearing to pull out, put a new one in, and yeah, then we can go ahead and chuck the gearbox back in. So it's the next day working on the 180. We're up to replacing the pilot bearing, which means we are in need of a bearing puller. There's lots of different brands, makes and models you can go with. My personal favorite is the Woolies home brand. Seems to get good results with that. Got a loaf of it right here. I've heard good things about Tip Top 4 grain, not so good I've heard, doesn't seal as well. But yeah, I guess we're tried and true, Woolies home brand. People do ask about warranties. It's bread, it doesn't come with a warranty. So we'll put the bearing puller to the test and pop that pilot bearing right out. Alright, so the pilot bearing is all in. Our bearing puller worked perfectly. Next up, while we're under here, we are swapping out the starter motor. The starter motor on this was actually playing up, and it did leave me stranded a few times. So that was another big reason why we were going ahead with doing the remain seal and starter at the same time. So we'll plumb this all in, and that will be installed. Alright, so next up, before we put the gearbox back in the car, what we're going to do is we're going to replace the springs that are, I believe they're called the center springs that are inside the shifter mechanism. So this just makes sure your shifter stays center, it doesn't kind of flop around. As your car gets older, those springs obviously lose their tension and it doesn't have that feel anymore. So what we're going to do is replace the springs with some new GkTech springs, and this will just bring it back to an OEM feel, maybe a little tighter, which will be good. And then we can organize, button and everything up to get the gearbox back in. So Morgan, it wasn't a day.
No,
It was more than a day.
I told him.
So this is our 7th
Yeah,
time
something like that.
we've taken an SR20 DET gearbox out of a Sylvia. And it hasn't gotten easier.
No.
Um,
I think you learn what to do,
well,
but yeah, what to do is still really difficult.
yeah, so, I mean, in the video, it's pretty hard to kind of get a grasp on timeline. We had gotten the exhaust off, the tail shaft off, pretty much all the bolts on the gearbox off, except for the top two, and we'd lowered the engine by lowering the subframe just slightly. That just gives you a bit more clearance. And that took us about 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So we were thinking, sweet, we're on this, it'll be out in maybe another half an hour, swap everything around, chuck it back in, it'll be like 4 or 5 hours kind of thing, which it should have been. 2 bolts, those last 2 bolts at the top, fought us for about 4 hours.
I think we learn a good lesson as well.
Start with the hardest
Always
one.
start with the hardest bolts.
Yeah, start with the hardest bolts because, boy, is it frustrating. And then everything after that just frustrates you even more and more and more, and it's just, yeah. So we ended up getting it though. We did crack the bolts. One bolt was under 300 kilos of force it took to crack. And the way that we know that is because we had to use a ratchet strap, and that ratchet strap was rated at 350 and it was starting to bend the hook. So around about 300 kilos of force it was to crack the bolt at the top. So whoever you are, because it's definitely had an aftermarket clutch in, we had a look, it looks like an extreme clutch. Whoever you are that torqued it to 300 kilos, I hate you, because it was so hard.
Yeah.
But everything else was good. So now, fingers crossed, it's not leaking.
No.
So the car's not leaking.
Yeah.
So my garage no longer gets oil on the floor. Although, in saying that...
Is the although?
Huh?
The although. What's the although?
Although, yes. So we found out that it's actually leaking still. Not the rear main seal. Rear main seal, solid, not leaking there. It's all dry. Sweet. Power steering. I think we noticed it while we were doing it. The power steering is still leaking. Fortunately, though, it is not a hard line. So the problem before that we had was the hard line was split. So as soon as there was any pressure or turning of the wheel, it would spurt high pressure power steering fluid out, which was not ideal. Smelt ridiculously bad. But now it's the feed. So I replaced that with a new hose and a new clamp. So I must have over tightened it or done something wrong. So that one should be a pretty simple fix. So for the most part, it's leak free. It's just the power steering, which is, again, we didn't film the power steering fixing that, I don't think.
No, I don't know.
Yeah,
That was a while ago though, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was, yeah. Anyway, 4 power steering pumps later. Yeah. So we're rambling on. The 180 is sweet. It's shifting really good. I'm thinking I'm going to have to take out the small helper spring in the centering springs for the shifter, because it is quite, not tight, it's quite hard to get over to the sides to get that first and second gear or fifth and reverse. So
because it's a GkTech product and they have 3 different springs you can use, and they're actually all different thicknesses, so you can double up stuff
them.
like that.
For me, the middle spring I thought wasn't good enough. The small spring was far too, it was practically like there was nothing in there. And the big spring was too heavy, too hard to squish. So I thought, I'll have a happy medium. I'll put the medium and the small one together, which was somewhere in between medium and the hard spring. It's still, I guess when you're squishing a spring down like that, it's very different to trying to shift a lever like that.
The funny thing is I did the same thing, because I've done that on my S15.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I chucked 2 of those, the small and the medium spring in.
Yeah.
And then decided I actually don't like that. So I took, I think, the small one out and just ran the medium.
Just the medium, yeah. I think that's probably what I'll do. We won't have to bore you guys with a video on that. You've seen how to do it. You can do it with the gearbox in the car, so that's fine. Next video. Morgan bought a car. We have elaborated on it in the previous video. Morgan has bought a car. Yeah. No one has guessed what it is yet. So, do we have another hint?
Okay, I think one hint will be, it's typical of my kind of car that I'm into.
Nah, that's a shit hint.
Is that too broad?
Dolphin. Yeah, well...
Okay, it's not Euro. There you go. That's the same, but more...
Okay, that's your bonus hint. Here comes your real hint. Okay. It's a Japanese manufacturer that copied a certain style and series of cars and decade and made their modern day interpretation of it.
That's like harder.
No, how many times has a Japanese manufacturer gone, we really loved this era of this car, here's the modern day interpretation of it. And it is documented, you can find that out on the internet, but I think it's still, they've done a couple. You got the Figaro.
Okay. The what?
Figaro? The Nissan.
Oh. Well, anyway, I think that's the hint. I didn't get a Figaro.
No, you didn't get a Figaro. But that's your hint. And from the last video, it's funny and ironic at the same time. So thanks heaps for watching. We've been rambling on for far too long. Thanks again to everyone that subscribed. We hit 1,000 subscribers. It's very humbling. It's almost not real.
Yeah.
Like nothing's changed. It's just the number on the screen. But we really, really appreciate everyone that's subscribed, liked, commented, come along with the journey, especially Lemon to Lambo. If you've come out to our meets, bought any merch, we very much thank every one of you. And we'll be continuing and just seeing where it goes. Hopefully a Lamborghini. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So thanks heaps for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video where we reveal Morgan's ironic copy car from a JDM manufacturer. But until then, we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.